Text by S.E. Hinton. Day 7, Chapter 9. You think this is going to be worth it? Johnny whispered. What if I find out who did it? Nobody's going to find out who did it, I whispered back. We were gluing individual caps on the keys of the typewriters in office machines class. As soon as the key hit the paper, the cap would explode. Since this was the day of the 9-week test, there would be a lot of keys hitting at the same time. There was always something depressing about a test day, anyway. I figured this little job might liven things up some. The month that had passed since my fight with Jamie had been really draggy. Johnny and I got to school real early and used a special key Roger Gannett loaned me. It would open about anything if you knew how to use it. I didn't ask Roger what he used it for. Sure, it's worth it, I went on. Even if they do find out who did it, what's going to happen? We'd get sent to the office, get a lecture, and a couple of swats. That's nothing. Johnny gave me a dry look. Cole Collins isn't your father. Oh, I said, yeah, well, anyway, nobody'll know it was us. When we got through, we locked the door carefully and went out to the smoke hole, which was the road corner of the baseball field. Nobody else was there. It was still too early. Johnny had started smoking lately. I got the feeling it was to put something over on Cole. I've been meaning to take it up myself, but haven't got around to it yet. I guess Mason's all excited about his scholarship, Johnny said. You'd think so, having his pick of a few like that, I answered, but he's still so strung out sometimes, I think he's lost his marbles. I figured once basketball was over, and he was sure he was going to college, he'd calm down some. But he's on my back all the time, worse than before. Sometimes I thought Mason hollered at me all the time to make up for Pop not hollering at all. It was like he was constantly poking and prodding at Pop to make him do something. What exactly? I didn't know, and Pop sure didn't either. Sometimes he'd look at Mason like a chicken that had hatched a goose egg. If Mason was worried that Pop wasn't paying enough attention to me, he could have saved himself the trouble. Mason would be gone for college pretty soon, and then Pop would have to notice me a little more. I mean, I'd be the only kid then. At least he's got a job now, Johnny was saying. He dropped his cigarette and ground it under his heel. It did look cool. I'll have to get around to smoking one of these days. Yeah, at least he's gone more. I used to think I was going to really miss old Mace when he left, but now I think I'll cheer all the way to the airport. You haven't seen Jamie lately, have you? Johnny said. He sounded like he had rehearsed it. Well, it had been 1 month and 4 days since the basketball game, and I'd thought about her at least every hour since then. But I just said, not lately. I'd see her in the halls, and my heart would spook and take off at a pounding gallop. Then she'd just say, oh, hi, and I'd nod back, cool as possible. After that, I'd want to either run up and hug her, or belt her, or go off somewhere and cry. I didn't do any of them. I wasn't about to say all that to Johnny. Any particular reason? He asked. For a second, I wondered if Jamie had put him up to this. Maybe she missed me as much as I did her. Even then, I thought, no way, she didn't care. No special reason, I lied calmly. Johnny looked at me skeptically. Geez, Tex, you still do like her, don't you? He sounded like he couldn't imagine why anybody liked Jamie. Me and Johnny could always talk about anything. That was what best friends were for. It was weird not being able to say anything about this to him. I couldn't do it, though. Finally, I just said, let's get back. We don't want to miss the fireworks. I've called your parents, Mrs. Johnson said. Capping the typewriters had gone even better than we'd hoped. The dead silence of school on 9-week test day, everybody a little tense, whether they cared about grades or not. Test day'll do that to you. Me and Johnny looking at each other, cracking up before anything happened. Miss Carlson frowning. What are you two? And from the typing room next door, noise like a machine gun, followed by shrieks. Mrs. Bennett had to go home with a case of nerves. Miss Carlson couldn't get the class calmed down soon enough to have time for the whole task, so she had to divide it into 2 parts. We heard later that the news made it all over the school in 1 hour and over to the high school the next. All in all, it went better than we'd ever hoped, except that we were the suspects and laughing too hard to deny it. Your fathers, I should say. I stared down at the paperweight on Mrs. Johnson's desk, one of those balls you turn upside down to make it look like a snow scene. I tried to look sorry. You called my father? At work? Johnny's face went white. The last time you got into trouble, your father asked me to call him if something happened again, immediately. He'll be here soon. Tex, your father will be here after school. You can wait in the office until he gets here. All day? I looked at the clock. It was 10:30. What about the rest of the tests I'm having today? You'll have to worry about that later. I'm not going to give you a chance to disrupt the rest of the day. Just have a seat in the foyer. You'll be there a while. The thought of sitting around all day was making me sick, but I didn't feel anywhere near as bad as Johnny. He looked like a ghost. I really felt sorry for him. He suddenly jumped a little and quickly jammed his hand down his shirt pocket. Here, he whispered, handing me his cigarettes. Holy cow, I breathed, taking them. That would be all he needed, Cole catching in with cigarettes on top of everything else. Quiet, you two, snapped an office worker. I stuffed the package in my pocket hastily, hearing heavy footsteps in the hall. Johnny looked like he was about to throw up. I glanced up into the doorway, cringing a little myself. It wasn't Cole, it was Mason. Hey, I said, what are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing, Mason said. My stomach plunged. I hadn't been too afraid of facing Pop, but the look on Mason's face was giving me chills. Oh, God, Mace, get out of here, Johnny begged. Cole's going to be... Cole walked in the door. I froze where I was slouched in my chair. Johnny looked like he wished he were dead. Only Mason seemed unaffected. He just nodded at Cole like he probably would if he met him in the dime store. Cole looked at Johnny, then at me. I might have known, he said. I managed to pull my legs in under me and straighten up some. Something about the tone of his voice made me feel like I was lower than an earthworm. Might have known what? Mason asked. Not hot-headed like you'd expect, just reasonable. Mrs. Johnson came to the door of our office. Since I do have a conference room, may I suggest we hold our conference there, instead of here in the hallway? Hello, Mason. I don't remember calling you to this meeting. I'm here anyway, Mason said. I knew Pop couldn't get off work and you'd want to talk to somebody about techs. So here you are. Well, come in, everybody. Everybody waited for Johnny and me to unfold ourselves and troop in first, like criminals going to the execution. Might have known what? Mason asked again, once the office door was shut behind him, like there hadn't been any interruption. He could look Cole in the eye. He'd grown that much. Cole stared back at him steadily with those dark blue eyes he'd branded every one of his kids with. I might have known that your brother was behind this. He usually is, whenever Johnny gets into trouble. Or Johnny gets Tex into trouble. I think it's 50-50, Mason said. He sounded calm, completely in control of himself, not flaked out like he had been lately. Cole turned to me. Tell the truth. Man, with Cole Collins towering over you, you told the truth. Was this your idea or Johnny's? I started to open my mouth, but Mason said, I know this was Tex's idea, and I know where he got the idea. The point is, it isn't always his fault. Last spring, when he and Johnny were messing with the shopping carts at the Safeway store, Johnny ran Tex into the side of the store and fractured his arm. Did I come storming over to your place trying to get you to lock Johnny up? No, I just figured next time would be Tex's turn to do something stupid. Cole didn't look convinced. He went back to Johnny. Didn't I tell you that this friendship wasn't going to do you any good? I want you to promise me that you're going to end it right here. Suddenly I was so glad Cole didn't know I was in love with Jamie. For the first time I understood what Romeo and Juliet was about, even though I never have been able to read the play. No, Johnny said. Cole said, what? Johnny had more guts than I'll ever give myself credit for. He answered, no, sir. Tex, Mason said suddenly, tell the truth. He was half mocking Cole and didn't care if he did know it. Are those cigarettes in your shirt pocket? I gave him the dirtiest look I could come up with. Johnny was close to shaking. Yeah, I said, they are. Cole looked at me and then at Johnny. Then he said to Mason, get to the point. The point is neither of these two turkeys is perfect. Both of them have a bad tendency toward trouble. But you can't blame Tex every time. He's not a bad kid, and he's not a bad influence, any more than Johnny is. Suddenly I realized Mace was controlling himself because he cared about what Cole thought of him. He didn't care if Pop or I saw him lose his temper, but here he was, breaking his back to get Cole's respect, and you could tell by the way Cole looked at him that he'd gotten it. Jamie was right, I thought. How weird. You may be right, Cole said at last, shook up as he was. Johnny couldn't help giving me a look of amazement. Somebody other than Cole be right? Well, now that we've agreed that the blame is to be shared equally, maybe you'd like to hear what the punishment is, Mrs. Johnson said. I'd like to hear what your punishment is, Cole said. What I have in mind may be different. 3-day suspension. The 9-week test will be made up every day after school, a test day. Then they will receive a grade lower than the grade they score. And I'm sending a recommendation over to the high school that Johnny and Tex be placed in separate classes next year. That sounds fair, Cole said. Then he said, John, what did I tell you would happen the next time you got into trouble at school? You're going to sell the cycle. Man, I was so mad I couldn't see straight. They were really being big shots. And when Cole glanced at Mason, I said hotly, he's already sold my horse. I don't think he can do much else to me. I'll probably think of something, Mason said mildly. I'm sure you will, you lousy son of a gun, Johnny said. Silence. Me and Johnny looked at each other. He said it for both of us, and to both of them, we shared a split second of triumph before Cole took Johnny by the shoulders and marched him out of the office. I'll be back this afternoon, Mason said to Mrs. Johnson, when Pop gets here. Mason, I understand your concern, but do you think that's necessary? Oh, yeah, he said. Oh, yeah. Then it was just me and Mrs. Johnson looking at each other over her desk. She sighed, Tex, you better take a seat in the foyer again. You're going to have a long day. I reckon so, I paused. Listen, Mrs. Johnson, I really am sorry. I didn't think it was going to cause all this trouble. Usually she would give me a wry grin and say, try not to let it happen again. But today she set her jaw and said, Tex, listen to me. You had better start thinking. I kind of cringed out of her office like a whipped puppy or pup. I hate to get people I like mad at me. But I can't seem to stop doing things that make people mad. It is really strange. Nothing exciting happened in the office that morning except when I accidentally tripped somebody. My legs are growing so fast, it's hard for me to keep track of where the end of them are. I got to leave for 20 minutes to get some lunch, but sitting around had killed my appetite, so I went out to the smoke hole instead of the cafeteria. I was getting congratulated on the best stunt of the year when I noticed a blue car parked along the road next to the baseball field. I ducked out of the group and ran over. Hey, Lem. I opened the car door and hopped in. What are you doing out here? Lem looked like I just woke him up from a nap. Hey, Tex. How's it going? Oh, I'm waiting for Dwayne Kirkpatrick. I'm trying to talk him into letting me have some of that third-generation homegrown he's got. Man, I could get $100 a lid for that stuff. I got a little bit left. Want to try it? One hit'll last you the rest of the day. For $100 and a lid ought to last you the rest of the month. Shoot, Lem, nobody's got $100 to spend on grass. You'd be surprised, man. And this is dynamite stuff, killer weed. Well, if you're waiting for Dwayne, you'll be here all day. He skipped school to go fishing. Lem shook his head. That turkey. He's got no sense when it comes to money. He'll make the grade in Aggie school, though, 'cause he sure knows how to breed his weeds. How's the baby? I asked. Lem been doing grass himself. His eyes were reddish, and the car smelled so strong I thought I was going to get a contact high. You know, even though I don't smoke grass much, I really like the way it smells. I always connect it with friendly people. Oh, he's fine. You know, that kid is really smarter than the average baby. Connie looked it up in a book. He's real advanced for his age. Big, too. I hadn't seen Lem in months. Not since that time we went to the city to see about Mason's ulcer. But he didn't seem very excited about seeing me. When somebody's smoking, it's hard to get them excited about anything except ice cream. Still like it in the city? Yeah, there's always something going on. I miss having horses, though. I ain't had a chance to ride in a year. When you going to get another horse, kid? I don't want another horse, I said, my stomach tightening. Losing Negrito was like losing my best friend. Well, I know how that feels, Lem said. Why don't you come by this afternoon? I said. Mason would be glad to see you. I didn't realize I was lying till I saw the look Lem gave me. I went quiet. Then Lem said, You know, I used to think all Mason wanted was money. But that ain't it. Or he'd be in the business with me, 'cause I'm rolling in it right now. But what he really wants out of life is to be respectable. If that ain't a heck of a goal. Different people go different places, I said, getting out. I had to be heading back to the office. Say hey to Connie and the baby for me. Lem seemed to be thinking hard for a minute. Then he said, I'm making a delivery out here this afternoon. You want a good deal on white crosses? I shook my head and waved him off. Maybe I was just depressed about going back and sitting around the office. But I had a strong feeling that Lem didn't belong in the city. There are people who go places and people who stay, and Lem should have stayed. Mrs. Johnson called me into her office when I got back. Tex, she began, then stopped. She sniffed suspiciously. Have you been smoking grass? Darn. I should have let my clothes air out a little before coming back in. No, ma'am, I said. I wouldn't want this day to drag out any longer than it has to. I suppose that's true. Anyway, what I wanted to talk to you about was a job this summer. Mr. Kincaid of Kincaid Quarter Horses contacted the school wanting to hire some kids for summer work. Would you be interested? Sure, I said eagerly. Mr. Kincaid wanted me to emphasize that he doesn't want a bronc buster or people out to play cowboys and Indians, but for some reason I think you'd behave responsibly in a job like that. I don't know why I think that, except I did have 1 or 2 people you mowed lawns for last summer call me and say they were pleased with your work. Here's Mr. Kincaid's card. Give him a call and say I recommended you. Please don't give me any reason to be sorry I did. No, I'll do a good job. I take horses serious. That may be what saves you, Tex. Would being expelled bother you? I almost dropped the card. Expelled? I managed finally. Yeah, it would. I was seriously considering it today. In fact, I've seriously considered it several times during the last 3 years. I haven't because I like you. But I like an orderly school even more, and if it comes down to a choice, you just might lose out. Understand? I nodded. Expelled. I didn't even know anybody who'd been expelled except Paula Louise for jumping in her home ec on her home ec teacher with a rolling pin. It's not very long until school's out, but remember, it's never too late to be expelled. Mrs. Johnson's eyebrows twisted together in the middle when she was saying something serious, not very seriously. Now just take your seat again. Your father ought to be here about 4. About 4. It was noon. I had heard the phrase killing time, but now I knew what it meant. I felt like I had murdered a whole day. I could never hack an office job. You know how it feels when your foot goes to sleep? Well, by 4, I felt my whole body had gone to sleep, including my brain. Mason came stalking in, right at 4. He didn't say much, but it was pretty clear that he'd used up his quota of self-control for the day. Come on in, Mason, Mrs. Johnson said. You too, Tex. Almost everybody had gone home except the 6-hour gym guys. You could hear them out on the baseball field. Mrs. Johnson wanted to get us out of the way of the janitor, who was mopping the office. I don't know if the old man is going to show up or not, Mason said abruptly. He said he would when I talked to him, Mrs. Johnson said. If I remember right, he came up here to talk to me about you a few times. Your big problem was fighting. It took all Mason's politeness not to scowl at her. He certainly did not want to remind me that he'd been in trouble before, too. Yeah, I said, I've never been big on fighting. But you've been in here for everything else since the 7th grade, Mason said. He didn't get into fights much anymore. Nobody wanted to mess with him. Well, anyway, this is the first time Pops had to come in and talk about it, I said defensively. Mason gave me a sarcastic grin. It's not the first time he's been asked. It'll be the first time he's showed up for it. Just about then, Mrs. Seymour from 7th grade speech stuck her head in the door and said, Helen, come here and look. You won't believe what I found in a locker. That stuff had been going on all day. I never realized how much running around the building was involved in an office job. I think I can trust you two to stay here. Sure, I said. Mason didn't say anything. I wouldn't have cared if he left. Instead, he paced around the room getting madder and madder. I don't know why you have to go poking your nose in, I remarked. I was thinking it was a wonder he had any insides left. He'd had to go to the doctor again just a few weeks ago. I am poking my nose in because I don't want to see you get expelled, he said savagely. I started. You knew I might get expelled? God, yes. They were laying bets on it over at the high school. Huh? I said, amazed. I sure hadn't known what a big deal I was causing. You had just better wake up a little, man, Mason began when Pop walked in. Surprise, surprise, Mason said. Pop took one look at him and decided to ignore him. When Mace was like that, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. I hear you got into some trouble, Pop said. He'd come straight from work. He was covered with oat dust and burlap fuzz. Yeah, I answered. I glued caps on the typewriter keys this morning. School started off with a bang. Well, I wonder where you got that idea. He was trying hard to keep from grinning. I had known all along that Pop wasn't going to think this was real serious, especially since he was the one who had told us about doing the same thing in high school. It probably never occurred to him that I'd try it, but it was a little late to make it the crime of the century. I couldn't see what else he could do, besides take it calmly, but Mason was absolutely enraged. Okay, he stalked around the room like a frenzied panther. Okay, so you can't take Tex serious. You can't give a dang about what happens to him. All right, I'm trying to live with that. Then think about me. For goodness sake, how do you think I feel, seeing you being nice to him, like you'd be nice to a gall darn stray puppy? Well, I'm the one who has to look out for him and what's going to happen when I'm not here. Pop and I were both staring at him. I was ready to call on the straitjacket people. Geez, make it easier on me if nothing else. He is my brother even if he isn't your son. It was so quiet. Just the far-off sounds of the baseball game in a wood dove somewhere. It seemed like a long time went by before Pop said, Who told you that? And I didn't recognize his voice. Mason looked like a person who had seen death. His face was gray, even his lips. I asked you. Who told you that? Pop said again. His voice was deadly, the voice of an ex-con. Mason opened his mouth and shut it, looking strangely like a fish on land. Finally he managed, Nobody had to tell me. I know when you went into prison and when you got out, and I know his birthday. Nobody had to tell me. Oh, Mason had gotten some weird idea. He was Pop's kid, and I wasn't. Man, he was ready for the funny farm. I looked confidently at Pop, waiting for the explanation. The real dates, waiting for him to laugh and say, You're wrong there, Mace. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. He didn't look at me. The room seemed to be getting black. Time stopped, then started back up again. I tried to wake up. What was happening? I turned to Mason. Tex, he said, fighting hard to sound normal, a normal voice coming from an ash-gray face. I didn't mean... Texas, listen to me, kid. I didn't listen to him. I turned and ran instead. I didn't ricochet blindly down the hall, bouncing out the lockers like a stray bullet. I ran steadily, timing my breathing, not wild or crazy or particularly fast. Almost like I knew where I was going, almost like I had somewhere to go. Chapter 10. Hey, Tex. Hey, kid. Hey. I finally looked over at the car pulling up alongside me. I opened the door and jumped in, even before I realized it was Lem. I just wanted out of here fast. Going somewhere? He asked. Wherever you are, I said. My mind would go blank and time would stop, then start up again with a sickening throb. You don't look too good, cowboy, Lem said. Am I awake? I asked. It seemed like I was, but I really couldn't tell. Yeah, listen, Tex. I'm headed back for the city. I got another stop to make. So make it, I said automatically. I was flashing hot and dizzy one second, sick and cold the next. The grass smell in the car was making me sick. I pushed the button that rolled the window down. I mean, I can't give you a ride back here. That's okay. Speed it up, will you? He was driving like a poke. A lot of stone people do that. I'd rather ride with a drunk any day. If Lem didn't speed it up, I was going to reach over and bash his face in. I couldn't think straight. When I tried to think, my mind turned into a crazy red mess. You know what? I don't really hate old Mason. Lem said it to me. Said it, not me. After a few minutes, I realized he was continuing the conversation we'd been having that morning. That morning was years and years ago. I could barely remember it. You hate a lot of people? I asked him. The word was taking on a whole new definition for me, like the word water would change for somebody drowning. Oh yeah, sure, my old man for one, and Connie's parents for a while. They ain't so bad now. I did hate Mace some back when he made the team his sophomore year and got to thinking he was such a hotshot jock, and him and Bob Collins got so thick. I thought he figured I wasn't good enough to be his best buddy anymore. But now, shoot, old Mace would have left me behind whether Bob was there or not. People change, I reckon. You know, hate is a real funny thing, like George Regis. I've hated him since grade school, and the only reason I can think of is because he had a lunch pail like I wanted. Weird, huh? All these years and I never hated anybody. I was dumb. It suddenly dawned on me that I must be the dumbest person in the world. I wasn't going to make up for it, though. I was going to be to smarten up real quick. Lem didn't notice the conversation being a little strange. Stoner people are always having strange conversations. Tex, if you're that cold, put the window back up. I ain't cold. I tried to stop shaking. I ain't cold. Mason had said, He's my brother, even if he isn't your son. And Pop said, Who told you that? And that meant, oh gosh, what did it mean? I couldn't think about it. I kept wiping my face off with my shirt sleeve, but the sweat kept pouring down. Look, Lem began slowly, would you mind coming with me at this next place? I got some deliveries switched around and have to do some explaining, and it'd help if I wasn't by myself, you know? All right. I wish you were a little meaner looking. You're big enough to scare somebody, though. If you just didn't look... Who was that Connie's always saying you look like? Goofy or Bambi? I answered absently. My fingers dug into my knees so hard the nails bit through the jeans and into the skin. I concentrated on that. Lem didn't have anything else to say until after we'd driven through the city a while. Look, Tex, you just go along with anything I say, okay? If it looks like there's going to be some hassle, we'll leave. I don't want any trouble. You must have burned these guys bad, I remarked, trying to appear interested. I had to be normal. If I wasn't, Lem might guess. Lem might already know. Who else knew? Everybody? Jamie? For a second, I almost blacked out again. I wanted to wake up real bad. Lem was shaking his head. It was just an honest mistake. I can fix it. Don't worry about me, I said, looking out the window without seeing anything. They try to hassle me, and they'll be sorry. I'd like to make somebody sorry. Hey, Lem said, I like your attitude, By the time we pulled in the parking lot of a big apartment complex, I was really lost. I can't find my way around the city too good anyway, even when my mind is working. I wondered where I could go from here. Maybe Lem could use a partner. He could use some help. He wasn't exactly the smartest person in the world. I could make some money and be doped up all the time. That sounded great. That sounded wonderful. We went up the stairs to the second floor. There must have been 1,000 apartments there. It reminded me of the time me and Mason went to see Lem. Mason never lied to me. Sometimes it drove me nuts. But one thing I could always count on was that Mason never lied to me. He never told me the truth, either. Lem stopped in front of an apartment that had all the curtains pulled shut. He knocked twice, then twice more. The dramatics of it vaguely irritated me. There were more important things going on. We heard footsteps stop at the one-way peephole, then the door was unlocked. We'd been wondering where you were lately. Who's your friend? A connection out in Garyville. He's cool. We went in, and he chained the door shut behind us. The apartment was dark, and an old Rolling Stones album was playing on the stereo. I remembered what Lem had said, and tried to look mean. I couldn't concentrate on it, though. My brain was out of focus. It seemed like, right away, Lem and this guy were into a heavy discussion about samples and deliveries and junk. Other than noticing that the guy seemed hacked off about something, I couldn't pay attention. It just seemed like a bunch of crap. This was not important. I wasn't Pop's kid. That was what they were saying. My mother. Why had I always thought of her as somebody really nice? Somebody who would have loved me? I thought I remembered, but maybe I got what I remembered and what I imagined mixed up together. I had always thought that she and Pop had been happy together. He never wanted to marry anybody else. And me? If I wasn't his kid, then whose? Did he even know? It was going to be never. He was never going to care about me. It wasn't going to be next time he got back from a trip, or when Mason left, or when I went on the circuit with him. There was nothing I could do to make him care. I realized I was making a strange little sound, like a dying animal. I couldn't stop it, but Lem and his friend didn't hear. I couldn't see how he could do that to me. Play like he cared, but not really. I couldn't help being born. I was more like him than Mason was. How could he do that? It wasn't my fault. I didn't deserve. The guy Lem had been talking to started throwing a fit. He was jumping up and down, screaming, acting like he'd blown his mind. Even this took a couple of minutes to get my attention. I mean it, man. You can't come in here giving out samples and come back with a bunch of crap. What do you think we are, man? Stupid? Where do you get off with this, buddy? Lem was stammering around, not scared, just too stoned to think clear. It annoyed the heck out of me. Mason was right. Lem was stupid. Mason was right about a lot of things, but then he was the real kid, the one who counted. Now wait a minute, Kelly, just wait a minute, Lem mumbled. I wasn't in the mood for this. I gave up my idea of joining up with Lem. Not if you had to put up with weirdos. A Chinese-y-looking guy came out of the bedroom. Keep it down, Kelly, keep it down. He was almost too spaced out to talk. I'm leaving, I said to Lem. These people are nuts. I turned and started to unchain the lock. Where do you think you're going? Kelly quit jumping up and down long enough to ask me. I'm leaving. I don't have to take this stuff. I reached for the doorknob, but Kelly set up such a racket I turned back to watch. He's going to narc. He's going to narc. He raced around the room, yanking open drawers and cabinets, feeling under the sofa, frantic. I was amazed. I'd never seen anybody act like that in my life. He was screaming, "Narc!" till it was a wonder one didn't show up. No, it's cool, his friend kept saying. It's cool. Don't seem too cool to me, I said. Lem nodded. You're right. We better get out of here. Kelly found what he was looking for. It was a .22 pistol, and he had it leveled at me. You ain't going nowhere, man, he screamed.